I've had a rough couple of months, and I'm sure some of you can relate to this, but I get focused on the weirdest things when I'm having a tough time. This is Limbus Company. You flip each of your skills' coins and add their coin value to the skill's base if you get heads. Then that determines your damage. If there's an incoming attack, you also use that process to clash against the attack. The winner parries the loser and then gets to flip their coins again to do damage. So you'll see a bunch of rounds of clashing and some unopposed attacks, and then they'll flip coins again, whoever wins, to get to do damage. Now I'm getting heads pretty often. What's up with that? It's Sanity, which is that blue orb next to each unit. This goes up as they're winning. It's basically like morale. So if they win a clash or get a kill or some abilities restore sanity, that increases or decreases their chance to get heads on their coins. This goes from negative 45 to 45, so if things are going pretty well, they can be almost guaranteed to get heads or almost guaranteed not to if things are going rather poorly. This seems like it would be really snowbally, and it can be at first. This means that if you start winning clashes, your skills are more often performing at their higher power level, which makes you even more likely to win more clashes in the future. But most of the more challenging enemies in Limbus Company have attacks that are too strong in clashing for you to block using a normal attack. So you have to use egos instead. These spend the colored resources you're generating when you use skills, as well as costing a chunk of the unit's sanity, which makes them less likely to get heads in the future, remember, but in exchange, the attack has a much higher base value. You can see even a relatively modest value like Impending Day here is higher than all of the abilities on the previous team by quite a bit. And they have various stronger effects. They all give the unit a passive after they've finished performing the ego once per fight. Some of them hit multiple targets like this one, and they provide various buffs and or debuffs to your allies and the enemies when you use them. But of course, because they cost sanity, you're spending away your ability to get heads on your attacks to use these stronger hits, so you can't be too greedy. It's all too easy to lose your grip on reliability for your normal attacks and spiral out of control. Just like you can snowball toward having high sanity, you can easily sort of death spiral if it gets too out of hand. So you need to be careful not to use too many egos, and if your sanity gets too low, your units will even attack each other with their egos. This brings us to the build interface for Limbus Company. Here it is. Here are the units you saw fielded, and 7 other units. They're there for their supportive passives, so we'll see Gregor here wasn't on the field, but if I click him, you can see he has a passive when he's on the field, and also one when off the field, a supportive passive that was healing the team a little bit. Here's that other team I was using, and what I want to talk about in this video is the way in which Limbus Company does try to help you set up a useful team, but I don't think does a great job. I'm just very happy that it tries, where a lot of games really don't. Let's imagine that I wanted to use Dawn's telepole a lot of times on this theme, which I broadly do. You can see its cost up here. That's nice, so I can keep in mind that it costs this red resource, Wrath, Gloom, and then Envy. And then I could go back to this other screen and think about how much of those resources I'm likely to generate. And certainly this little affinity resource summary is useful to that end. It tells me how much of each affinity all of my identities generate with all of their normal attacks. Of course, I'm not ever going to field all of these identities at once. And you can see that when you queue into an experience run, like I was doing at the start of the video, you can see that. Here you get a summary of only the affinities generated by identities you plan to actually field, and then this number here is the cost of that affinity by all egos equipped by all of the on-field units if you used each of them once each, which you totally wouldn't in normal gameplay. You would use some more than others, of course. But again, certainly the beginning of what would be helpful information. I really appreciate that Limbus Company tries to help you do this. I think most games make no attempt to help you set up a build at all. They just kind of expect the player to expect to need to do it themselves. But I don't think that's good. And I also don't think Limbus Company is doing a particularly good job, but it's doing better. And I think it would be worth talking about what would make this easier, or what is even going on here. Is it really useful to have this information? You know, difficulty can be a subjective thing. It may not be clearly useful to a lot of players to use this level of information in normal gameplay. And indeed, throughout a lot of Limbus Limbus Company, I would argue that it really isn't necessary to use that level of build understanding. It's just not really necessary to do that for a lot of the time you play the game. Though I do think some of Limbus Company's content does at least reward you for doing such a build making process. And again, the game does provide these systems, so it seems clear to me that the developers are interested in the player having some aid setting up a build. I don't think that it's a matter of whether the game wants to do it. I just think it isn't that good because it is hard to give the player useful help making a build system. So I want to discuss that more. So at base, I think what would be the most helpful would be the ability to just pin specific options. This could be in a lot of games where you have many different spots where you could make a choice, but you don't necessarily equally care about all of them. Now, I'm the type of player I really want to use all the space provided, but there are still some egos that are more important to my teams than others. And Sinclair has an ego that lets him generate extra resources if he gets a kill. He gets extra resources of that skill's affinity. So whatever sin affinities my Sinclair ID has, I can generate a lot of those skills resource types. And that means that it would be useful to keep that in mind when I see this screen. You know, I happen to know off the top of my head, since this one is Gloom, Lust, and Wrath, I really don't need to worry about those costs. You know, if I saw some big number here, I don't need too much. He's going to be able to generate most of it by himself. But there isn't an easy way to mark that, you know, sort of mark against that, or say, well, I really want to use that ego so I can, you know, fire up the ego generating machine. While we're on the subject, there are a few other things Limbus Company does that I think are pretty useful to help the player manage the amount of information coming in. One of them is much more simple. It's just this option to toggle the amount of detail in an individual skill. I'm going to set it to medium to start giving you an example. So you can see that this will tell you what each of the coins on the skill will do. It tells you all the information about the skill, but it doesn't define what, for example, burn is. If I hit maximum, then it'll give me a definition of what the burn keyword does on the side of the skill. It tells me what my opponent's skill effects do, etc., like you've highlighted over those keywords, right? And if you set it to minimum, then it just gives you the raw coin and damage values for the skill. And of course, you know, it's element and damage type or whatever. It doesn't tell you what the effects do. To some extent, though, this information isn't complete. For example, I can see that Ryoshu's Forest for the Flames ego inflicts Fragile. So let's see what Fragile does. Let's say I didn't remember. It says, take more damage from skills based on the effect's count for 1 turn, max 10. Take more damage from skills based on the effects count. Based on the effects count, how? The maximum option doesn't say how much more damage Fragile makes me do. I happen to know off the top of my head it's 10%, and some of these effects actually do give you the detail if you hover over them. You probably can't see that, and I'm not going to focus in for you. I want to emphasize that if you were playing this on mobile, that would be a bit of a pain. Another nice little tool is that at the end of a particular run or fight, you can see a little summary of how much damage everybody did. So you can see that Ryoshu did the most damage, but I can see a breakdown of how much damage dealt and taken by each individual unit. This is a lot more meaningful when you do the game's longer pieces of content because, of course, it averages out a little bit better. In this particular context, I know Faust usually does more damage. I don't think it's particularly meaningful that Ryoshu happened to do more this time, and it isn't more by very much. But those are nice features, and the developers have mentioned that they're interested in making some of them a bit better, adding some clarity to the detail levels and making it more clear which enemy is attacking who and stuff like that, right? This game is making the effort to do that. Well, actually, speaking of which, as I was finishing recording this video, they actually released an update for Limbus Company that includes some changes to some of the things I mentioned. So one thing I didn't talk about too much, but which I think is a big deal, is ego clarity. So you remember when I showed you some egos as an example, you couldn't even see me activating them. Now we have this new screen where there are these big cards. It shows you their cost. It shows you, I think if you're going to corrode, like if your sanity will hit -45 by using them. I'm not sure if that's what that is, but that's useful. You can see all the details of each attack on each one. And if you want to click it and see the exact screen you would have seen if you were browsing it in the build system, you can see that. Now, something I would like, and I haven't tested this yet, so I don't know if it'll be there, is if it will show you the passive in some intuitive way. I think that's really important. So let's just use one and see if that works. Let's use Red Eyes, and the passive is on Clash Win, inflict 1 bind next turn. Let's use this and see if it shows me the passive. Something I wanted to mention as well is that I think these things are still useful for people that are totally uninterested in making builds necessarily. I feel like this stuff is mostly actually just about the player using the systems in the game and things feeling clear enough and transparent enough, I guess is the word I'm looking for, that the player feels like they know what's going on, and when they use things, they understand what they do, or they feel empowered to be interested in that if they want. And then the player can make a decision about whether they like the parts of the game where that detail matters or not. But as it stands, I think a lot of people simply don't know how to find some of those details. So now that we've used that ego, let's see if there's any way to indicate where the passive is. And please keep in mind that maybe there is one and I just won't know where it is. We'll just quickly take a look. This interface was here before. You can see the individual egos, but there's, I don't think, any indication that I have that passive. Let's just open the ego screen again and see. No, it doesn't look like it. So yeah, some indication, and again, maybe there is one there. I hope I didn't miss it. Would be really nice. Another detail while we're here is the modification to the clash arrows. So you had this button before. I'm not sure what this single arrow is actually. Maybe just the most threatening attack or the fastest attack. And then if you clash them in a row. No, I don't know what this single arrow does. But anyway, you can click this and it will show you where every attack is going. Now they had this before, but the difference now is that the arrows are color-coded to what's going on with them. So previously, enemy arrows were just red, and your arrows were, you know, tan or yellow. But now, an unclashed attack is red, whereas if you clash an attack, it changes the color of that interaction, so you know you've blocked that one. The red arrows are unblocked attacks, so I can just go through and check very quickly at a glance. If there are any red arrows, then I know there's an unblocked attack, or, you know, this is a block targeting someone, so that's fine. This is 6 speed and it's targeting Sinclair, so we can still intercept that. And so you can see very clearly now at a glance, I can much more easily tell, despite the fact that there's a lot of arrows, that this attack is the only thing I'm not clashing with, and it's a block, so I'm not taking any damage. I can do my round of attacks. Let's just have Heathcliff shoot him, and I know I'm going to be safe. So a great round of improvements. Again, I think it's really exciting to see a developer actively improving these things. I would really like to be able to see ego passives more visibly, and this doesn't address a lot of the stuff I would discuss in this video about, you know, being able to make a build more coherently, but I still thought it was worth mentioning how quickly, you know, I barely even had time to record the video before, bam, there was an update to those systems. So really cool. This game is making the effort to do that, which I think is praiseworthy. I think that's really good. A lot of people have the expectation that you're just going to need to manage the making of your build yourself. And I think that's understandable. You're still going to do that even if the game gives you a lot of help doing this. I like writing down on a little notepad all the minute details of my build. I'm writing down way more than any game would ever give me help managing, of course. But I do think it's still valuable, important even, to have a game help the player make a build, even if it's just a matter of degree. They're helping more, but you still want to take notes or whatever. When I was recently in my state of discomfort, we had a couple of neighbors on both sides who wouldn't really rein in their kids, who constantly had loud parties into the night. They refused our management's and the police's requests to stop, so we had to move away very quickly, very unexpectedly. And I, a person who makes builds for a living, was left without my computer setup, which I normally use, you know, with multiple monitors to, you know, spend a ton of time making builds. I didn't have a lot of time, and I didn't really have anywhere to note stuff down. You could certainly use paper. I have a handwriting disorder, so my handwriting is incredibly sloppy, and it takes me forever to write things. And it was in this contrived state of being that I started playing Limbus Company. In fact, after a few months, when we were finally ready to get out of there, the developers released Mirror Dungeon Hard Mode 2. This is exactly what I want. This is a piece of difficult, build-licious content for me to chew on during my state of distress. Hell yeah. But what's this? a note. Identity level 35, uptide tier 3, threadspin tier 3, sure. All starter buffs active. What's that? Oh, it's this new system that you released, this new passive tree. I'm not going to unlock all of that before trying that difficult piece of content. Make it bigger. I, a Buildcraft man, am going to unlock the entire passive tree? No, of course not. Because I know that you're not going to make the difficulty challenging and enjoyable for me, someone who's spent time managing builds, if I actually have all the options the game allows. After all, if you did that, it wouldn't be accessible to people that don't take the time to make a more involved build. So I thought. In I went, and I got completely destroyed. To my delight, I found that this really was something challenging enough that even if you made an involved build, it really would sock you good, grit your teeth. It is a challenging piece of content for people who really want to make builds. I often have the experience that I sort of overpower the game systems once the game gets going, because I end up building up synergies upon each other, and the game just hasn't accounted for that, probably wisely, like a lot of people maybe don't do that. Again, the key here is that thing I was saying, a lot of people don't have the time to enjoy that. It's not necessarily that they're, I don't know, like not smart enough or something. It isn't that. It's that it's just time consuming at a certain point. A lot of the times it's time consuming for parts that aren't particularly meaningful. You just need to count how many of each resource you get, during a run. Here you can see me fussing over which skill goes where, but another thing I'm doing is thinking about ego resource generation. It would be helpful to have a summary of how many of each resource I generated total at the end of a run. That would really help me understand if the team wasn't generating as much of a resource as I thought, something like that. You can imagine having all that stuff would add up. It would make it much easier for someone with less time or resources or all of their worldly possessions packed up. Just imagine, I know, a ridiculous example, right? To make a build. It would make it much easier for people to at least start making a build, and it would make it easier for people who like making builds to get to the good part faster instead of just doing busy work to understand what the build is even doing. You could be making build choices sooner, and people who don't want to do that management could make a meaningful build without having to do it, which I think is good if they want to enjoy that. Of course, all of this is for naught if you can't get the build options available very quickly. One of the things I like about Limbus Company, and this is secondarily a recommendation, I suppose, is that you can get enough options to make meaningful builds relatively early in play. This is a game that upchucks the trend where build systems often involve you grinding to unlock many different options. You get a lot of the options pretty quickly, and Limbus Company is quite respectful of your time. You can get lots of stuff in this game and go about your daily life. You just get the best part, that perfect slice, and then you're out. You don't have to worry about playing for an enormous time investment, because that's just unsustainable for a lot of people. I think it's pretty wise of these developers to not attempt to compete with your hobby that is taking up almost all of your free time. You can just enjoy this anyway. But so many games that are focused on you making builds don't do that. They use the build system as kind of a means to an end for the rest of the game, not as an end in itself. The game isn't really about making builds, it just features things that you technically could construe to making a build. But imagine if more games weren't like that, and they were really interested in you making a build and hacking around and gave you the support to do so. Imagine if, man, we haven't even talked about this, imagine if people had actual resources to look at to see what would be useful to set up a build system. The poor developers of this game, I just want to make it clear one more time, I'm not really trying to be critical of like the affinity resource system and the build screen. Have you seen people talk about how they made a build? Like, besides me, not to brag, people talk about the build they've made, not how they made a build. It's difficult to do the human design and testing to make a game that is good for playing, not just having played. A game that doesn't just focus on the cinematic moments that are easy to advertise, but that really focuses on how the player will experience playing the game moment to moment. Things like this targeting system, which again, they have said they're thinking of revising to make more clear, easier to use. Those things are hard. It seems like a silly thing to us because we spend all our time playing those systems, but it must have been very difficult to test that type of stuff. You would need a lot of playtesting, which people should prioritize more, sure, but it is hard to do. And having more videos from people like me, for example, where people talk about how they're experiencing a build system would surely make those build systems better. So the task is set. Let's crush some crabs. We need to discuss these build systems. And I'm not entirely sure that this is a thing that will be fully sustainable. Like that whole discussion before about how you might just not have the time to really make an involved build. Well, that might mean that the reach of games with build systems is sort of inherently limited. I don't think it is, ultimately. I wouldn't have so much confidence doing this for a living if I thought that. I think that a lot of games just aren't doing it very well right now. But if they were given more exposure to people's different approaches to using their systems, they would be better at doing that, and making builds would become a more accessible activity. More games would be focused on it or designed to make it something you could do without spending a ton of time. And I think that would result in it becoming a relatively more, reasonable thing to do for your entire living. But I'm not really sure there's enough people to entertain doing this for a living. I just want to make it clear that I am crazy. I don't care. Like I'm making the videos. Go ahead, try to stop me. I will make these videos. By Poseidon, I will get the better build systems that I have in my head as I'm describing this stuff to you in this video. We will have that state of being over my dead body if that's what's necessary. Hey, I hope this was fun to listen to. I just wanted to share with you the experience I had while I was away. It was a lot of fun to make builds for this challenging new mode the game offered, and I do like that the game offers a lot of levels of challenge or different types of difficulty as well. I think that's something Limbus Company does well. I've been really enjoying iterating on this team. That's been a lot of fun. Since I've gotten back into the swing of things, I've got a new apartment now. I'm fine. We're going to be okay. I'll ramp back up the videos as quickly as I can. Thank you for your patience. But we have been streaming already, and so we've been able to kind of iterate on this theme every week. That's been a lot of fun. I do a run with the team. We talk through everything that the team is doing well or doing poorly, and then I change things up for next week's run. That's been great. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed watching. I hope this was something fun. I hope you can imagine how these systems being added to more games would make making builds in those games much more fun, much more time efficient. Again, you'd be kind of getting to the better part faster. Man, and I do think Limbus Company is making a great effort. I'll do another video covering the changes they said they planned to make when they come out. That would be really worth doing. Absolutely. I look forward to seeing them myself, but also it would just be interesting to discuss what is working, what feels like it isn't. And maybe some of you will say, no, I feel completely differently. That doesn't really matter to me. That's helpful as well. Let the developer decide for themselves who to listen to, right? Anyway, talk to you next time.